Today on the Pitchbook podcast, for the second time, we have relief pitcher Brad Liggett. He is pitching An Immense World by Ed Yong. Batter up! Brad, the demand was too high. We couldn't stop it. Everyone said, you got to bring this guy back. He's the best. He's better than his own brother. Bring him on. So here you are pitching for the second time. The first two time, that makes sense? Relief pitcher on the Pitchbook podcast. Welcome. How are you?
Thank you.
Hey, Brad.
It's wonderful. Hey, Zach. It's great to be back. Happy to help, educate the masses on some excellent books that they
That's
can
the
read.
goal. That's the goal. Life-changing books only. So last time you taught us about space, I actually learned a lot about space from our last video. I was listening to a podcast today and some of the things being referenced. I'm like, oh yeah, Brad talked about that.
Yeah. And I mean, it sounded like I knew a lot about space going into it, but it's really like that book was a cool opportunity to learn about space and think about space in ways that, I never had before. So I'm glad that I came across as knowledgeable and intelligent on something that I don't really know a lot about. So we'll see if I can, lightning can strike twice on this book.
There's a lot of pressure being brought back to the mound the second time. So this is good. All right. So you are pitching a book I've never heard of, An Immense World by Ed Yong. You showed us the book, and I think it has a gorilla or something on the front.
Some kind of monkey.
A
smaller, lesser primate.
Very
but
good.
You see here how the super title is How Animals Sense. Oh shoot, I'm reading backwards. Is that backwards for you guys? That's kind of stupid.
No, it's right.
Is it right? Oh, it's backwards for me.
Reveal the hidden realms around us.
There you go.
He looks like he's mesmerized by that butterfly. So this looks like a great cover.
Clearly, he's probably about to eat it or something.
I would like to judge this book by the cover, and I'm giving it 5 stars.
Okay, well, wow, are you in for a treat? You're gonna love it. So the book, I was turned on to this book by my wife, who I may have mentioned last time. She's a voracious reader. That's like what she does for entertainment. She doesn't like to watch TV. She doesn't like to hang out with me. She just likes to, read books. And so she recommended, I'm going to turn off notifications because hold on, sorry.
You're fine.
Edit that out. Just one sec.
Not a problem. People like to see how the sausage is made.
Yeah, exactly. I know we had some riveting podcasts banter last time. So anyway, this book was recommended to me by my wife, and she always she's never has a bad recommendation. You guys should probably recruit her someday if she'll come on.
Come on for sure.
You would love that, I'm sure. But anyway, she recommended this book, and just like the super title says, it's all about how animals perceive and sense the world. And he starts the book out by imagining this hypothetical scenario about a person being in a high school gym with all these animals. He has an elephant in there, an owl, and this is going off of memory, a snake, a rat, a spider, some other stuff. And he just kind of talks about how how all of these animals would react to something happening. He talks about how the mouse would scurry across, would cause the girl to scream. The elephant would bellow in as what does he call it? I can't remember the like a supersonic way that we can't even hear. And the owl, the snake would sense the rat with its heat sensors and would go to strike, but the owl would be coming in too. Anyway, he talks about how the different ways that these animals might perceive the same situation happening in a high school gym. And I'm not explaining it well, but that's kind of how he warms us up to what he's going to talk about. And then he starts talking about how this concept of an Umwelt, I think it's WLET. It's a German word for environment. And he talks about how each animal has its own unique Umwelt, which he kind of defines as its way of sensing the world and perceiving the world. And, how each animal is sort of shaped by the senses that it has and has developed over, evolution, et cetera, et cetera. And he uses an analogy to describe the Umwelt as kind of like you have this, imagine, like a park or a courtyard that is surrounded by different homes, and each home is different and unique. And each home is looking out on the same park or courtyard, but each home has different windows, different doors, different, ways to see what this world is. We're all looking at the same world, but it looks very different to each person in each different house. And he uses that analogy to describe how animals, see the world. And one example he gives, which is really interesting, is he talks about a tick, the insect, a tick. Its umwelt basically consists of three things. It only cares about three things. It cares about touch. It has mechanoreceptors that will, just automatically grab onto something that walks by. It cares about something called butyric acid, which is it's some kind of acid that all mammals give off. And so once it starts to sense butyric acid, it will, drop down from where it's at and try to, have those mechanoreceptors grab onto something that passes by. And then the last thing it cares about is heat, body heat specifically. And with those three things, like, it's complete. Most ticks are blind. They can't see anything. They can't hear. Most insects don't have, ears at all. And so its whole world consists of those three ways that it senses the world. And it doesn't care about anything else. It doesn't need to care about anything else. And it's, plentiful. I live right next to some hills, some hiking trails. And so every time I take my dog on a walk, he comes back with ticks because they're sensing that, and they're sensing him walking by. And I know, you can't even see them, but they're there. So this concept of the umwelt, and he talks first about how, about as humans, we sort of anthropomorphize every single animal. We see the animals through the lenses of our own selves and assume that they perceive and see the world the same way we do, or similar ways. But, throughout the book, like, it's just wild, the things that he goes into, and the animals that he talks about and the way they sense things is just so insane. And it's crazy to think about how we're only really learning about these things in the last, maybe 100, 150 years, because no one really cared, much about animals and what they're doing beforehand. And, people didn't see much of a sense in it. But he kind of divides the book between, the main senses that we're aware of. He kind of sticks to a main sense in each chapter. He starts out talking about, I think the chapter is called like leaking sacks of chemicals. And he talks about how animals, smell things and they taste things. And that has to do with the chemical reaction. And he talks about how basically every single sense, no matter what it is, involves some kind of like a chemical response, whether that's some kind of receptor that's detecting something, and in some way to interpret that detecting of something into a signal, or into sometimes not even a signal. Sometimes, animals have sort of sometimes even offloaded all of their mental processing to the environment. Like one example that's really cool of this is he talks about in the chapter about pain. He talks about he gets a lot into, whether or not animals can feel pain and how we perceive that and what pain even means. But he's talking about how many animals, have X amount of neurons, like a millionth of the neurons that a human being might possess. And so how do you even know what they can and can't feel? And he talks about how insects have offloaded most of their neural processing, like they don't have it, or they never developed it because they don't need it. And he talks about how a spider is basically offloading to its web its mental processing and its mental decision making, instead of having that be in its skull. I guess spiders probably don't have skulls, but in its head, in its brain, it doesn't need to think about it. All it needs to do is feel and react. And when it feels the right vibrations and motions on its web, it reacts. And so that's kind of an interesting thing that he talks about. Let's see.
Does he what's kind of it sounds like cool, interesting, like me reading the encyclopedia, the picture ones that we had as a kids about animals. What's the thesis like? And here's why it matters to humans. Does he get into that at all?
Yeah. He definitely gets into that, and we'll talk about that.
And I don't mean to get ahead of ourselves, but I'm just wondering if like it's just more, this is just cool, interesting stuff. Or
for sure, because it would seem at first blush it could be just kind of a book like, hey, here's some nifty tidbits, here's a bullet pointed list. But right. I will say this, he's an incredibly gifted author, and he's able to talk about, scientific things that could be pretty boring to have explained to you in really interesting and simple ways. And one of the things that I like that he does is he'll just say like, yeah, it's a lot more complex than this, but you don't need to worry about that. Here's what you need to know. You know, it doesn't matter that they have.
We're basically the
5 different-
spiders. We're the spiders. He's the web. Just tell us what we
Exactly.
need to know, right?
Exactly. But basically, like I said, each chapter is kind of divided in between different types of senses and sensing. And generally speaking, in each chapter, he'll probably go over, you know, anywhere between 5 and or more animals. And he talks about not only their senses, which is also, you know, always interesting, and like how they sense things differently. But what was really fascinating to me is he usually couples it with the experiments that scientists have done in order to, you know, prove or demonstrate or learn about these animals. And to me, that's just wild because, you know, it speaks to the brilliant minds that are working on these. Like, I'm glad there's some random dude in Wisconsin or whatever who's devoted their life to studying a certain type of parrot or whatever. It's crazy that somebody knows that much about one thing. And, you know, so he pulls from these experiments and data points, and he explains some of the tests that scientists have come up with to measure and determine. I'll give you a quick example that comes to mind. In the chapter when he's talking about the sense of smell, turns out elephants have an amazing sense of smell, which, you know, pretty intuitive, given that their nose is almost the most distinguishing feature about them. And he talks about how, you know, a scientist wanted to establish, you know, not only what they can smell or how sensitive their smelling is, but like what they're smelling, and to prove whether they know what they're smelling. And so one thing that I don't know how they came up with this idea, but this scientist, what she would do is she would just travel around following, you know, this herd of elephants and wait for them to you know, pee or poo. And she would dig up the soil that was soaked in their urine, put it in a bucket, and then she would try to predict where they were going. And she would try to go ahead of them and bury the soil, the pee soaked soil, and see how they would react. And
we're going in circles.
Yeah. Well, no, it's really funny because she talks about how when she did, you know, pee from a totally different herd of elephants, they would be really interested in it, and they would smell it, and they would kind of react to it, and obviously be curious about it, but they would kind of just, you know, just move on with their lives. But if she took some urine from the same herd and then now put it in front of them, they're utterly confused because they can sense that they not only know that that's elephant pee, they know that that's, you know, young Jimmy back there, who's been
going ahead of the herd. Jimmy, come on back.
But they're totally tripped out because they're like, how could it be possible that Jimmy is now ahead of us when 5 minutes ago, you know, he was way behind us? And they trip out and they start looking for Jimmy, the elephant, and they're not like, you know, relaxed until they can find and locate him, because it's utterly
space-time paradox.
Are we sure
Jimmy's
that she's just not bullying the animals? She's just teasing them. This is an experiment. we're just bullying.
It could
them.
be. And I'll try to think of some other like really interesting experiments that they came out, and some of them, you know, that he talks about are very cruel, that may have happened, you know, years before we sort of started to develop ethics with how we treat animals and stuff. But that was one thing that was really interesting about the book is hearing about the experiments that they used in order to determine you know, how well an animal can sense something or whether they can sense something. He talks about how in the chapter on pain, he talks about how zebrafish, just generally speaking, will prefer to stay in tanks that are filled with, like, you know, plants and gravel and stuff, versus a bear tank that just has water, BARE. But if they dissolve like a painkiller in the water that has nothing in it, they'll chill out. They want to go to that tank. They like enjoy the feeling of the painkillers.
Yeah, you can see why we personify everything. They got
Exactly.
painkillers. They get us. They understand us.
Exactly. They want to just chill out on their opiates or whatever. So let's see. What else do I have to say about this book? That was really cool. Is just it speaks to the human ingenuity of like, how do I design an experiment that will, you know, withstand scientific scrutiny in order to measure something that I'm curious about whether an animal can sense things. So go ahead.
I want to share a story. So in when was the great earthquake in San Francisco? Was that 87?
Yeah, it was kind of like, I barely remember it, and I was born in 81, so it would have been around then.
Okay. So my dad, they had a chow chow. He lived in Napa, just kind of northwest of San Francisco, of the Bay Area.
A chow, a dog, you're saying,
A
right?
chow, a
Okay.
dog. Yeah. Yeah. Chow chow. And they're watching the World Series, and all of a sudden they can smell dog feces. My dad's looking around like, what is that smell? Like, and they look over. His name was Doobie.
Drop the
They
doobie.
look over
Yep.
at Doobie, and he's got mess all over his face. Like, he's been outside, put it all over his face, came inside, and within like a minute or 2 minutes, the earthquake starts. And my dad, he always believed, he's like, they can sense things that we just are on a different level. And what you're saying makes sense, that they've evolved or have capacity to sense things that maybe we're just not hearing, we can't see, we can't sense. I mean, we obviously no longer live in the natural world anymore as humans. I
Hmm.
got my AC going, but does he get into that, like animals
Oh,
sensing things or
oh
helping?
yeah. Oh yeah. Like the very first animal that he talks about, I think, in the book that he discusses at length is dogs, because the I think the first chapter is about smell and taste. And so he talks about dogs, and he talks about how their umwelt, or their environment, their perceptual environment, is completely dominated by their noses. Um, and that everyone knows about a bloodhound, and dogs have an acute sense of smell, but it's not just that. It's like it's not just that they're really good at it. It's like that's what dogs rely on, before any other sense, is their nose. And he talks about how the shape of the nose, how, because you can imagine a dog's nose, and you see how it kind of has those comma shaped things on the side of its nose. And what it does is what's really unique about a dog and its sense of smell is that when humans smell, we take a sniff of something, we smell it and we breathe out, and that smell is largely gone until we sniff again. But the way the dogs work is that smell stays in their nasal cavity until they purposely expel it from those side, nostril things. And so they can continue, they're continually smelling something until they decide they wanted to kind of huff it out and smell something different. And I'm going to remind me to come back to dogs on my take home. I'm going to talk about my dog, whose name is Boomer. And kind of like how this book like sort of opened my eyes to like what Boomer's life is like, and a little bit more deeper understanding maybe of what he's experiencing. But yeah, he definitely talks about that. He talks about how one interesting thing that he talks about with smell is that it's not universal even among the same species. He talks about how the U.S. Army was trying to develop like some kind of horrible stink bomb as like a weapon or whatever, and they couldn't ever land on one because they couldn't universally get people to agree that it was stinky. Like for some percentage of population, like they didn't mind the smell of whatever the Army was cooking up. And so that's another interesting thing, is that
I have a friend that can't smell skunk. Apparently, like there's some percentage of the population that can't smell that skunk smell.
Yeah, and he talks about how there's some percentage of population where body odor normally smells kind of gross to us. It actually smells like vanilla to people born with a certain kind of gene. And so it's wild. He does talk about there's interspecies variation. There are some animals that have different sight, like some animals have a different another cone in their eye if they're female that the males lack. And so the male and the female of the species, see differently and see the world differently. And they talked about how
humans, maybe.
Yeah,
it could be. Yeah, it could be. Well, and it's one of the first things he talks about, which is really interesting, is how, again, he's talking about how we anthropomorphize animals and we just assume that they're just like us. And he talks about how humans, we're so dominated by our sight. We actually have, some of the best eyesight of any animal. Really, I think he said birds of prey are like the only animals that really have better eyesight than us. And so that dominates, our interaction with the world. And he talks about how for humans the concept or the concept of seeing is synonymous with facing something. And he talks about other animals and how they see completely differently. And because humans, we have the center of our acuity is right in the center of our eye, but with other animals, it's different. He talks about how cows always seem so like aloof or bored or dumb because they never like will look at you, you know, that they're just sit there in the field. And the reason why is because their visual acuity is like 100, it's like a 360-degree band on their, because their eyes are on the side of their head and they can see very clearly along that center band. So they can basically see the entire horizon at the same time. You know, the maid is walking up to milk the cow. She's seeing that maid, or the cow is seeing that maid approach her at the same time the farmer is walking away. And so it's crazy to think that an animal could see that. He talks about a mallard duck can see like all around them 360 degrees and all above them. And so imagine what that must be like. As you know, a mallard duck is flying, they're seeing portions of the world, you know, approach them and go further away simultaneously. And it's hard for our brains to capture that, because whenever we see something, it's because we're looking at it. We can't see, and we don't just look at it. We have to focus on it. You know, I can see kind of out of the periphery of my eye, but if I really want to pay attention, I'm going to look right at it.
Right.
He also talks about how, you know, birds, this is really kind of funny and sad, but he talks about how birds mainly can't see in front of them. Okay. Because most birds are, their eyes are on their side. He talks about a funny video where like this, some kind of bird is like displaying all his beautiful plumage to a female bird. And she kind of like just immediately like turns her head. And to us, it looks like she's ignoring him and like, I'm like, whatever. But really, she's actually focusing on him because she's turning her eye so she can see him, you know, directly. But anyway, so that's it's very interesting how he talks about how we have to sort of get outside of our own heads and our own experience to even really understand how animals perceive the world differently. Let's see what else. I kind of figured I would just kind of go along and kind of talk about some of my favorite parts of the book, because that's really the structure of the book. There's not really much of a spoiler in this book because it's nonfiction and he just goes along and talks about different kinds of animals. One really interesting thing that I'm not sure if I'll even be able to explain it very well, but he basically talks about this research with octopuses. This is having to do with touch and with like, you know, how much your mind controls or doesn't control your body. He talks about certain species of octopus where when they first like will give it things to, you know, kind of enrich its, like they'll give it like a locked box that it has to manipulate to find a treat. And he says that when they first start doing that, they're really interested in it and they'll do that. But like as time goes by, they become less and less interested. And they basically think, I can't really articulate this as well as it does in the book, but they basically think that each arm of the octopus has like its own nerve center that makes decisions. And that it's not just its central nervous system in its head, but each arm can kind of independently make decisions and react. And they think that's why they lose interest in those boxes, because it's like the arms have already learned what's in there and they don't really care to explore anymore. Anyway, just wild stuff like that. That's really fascinating to read about. In the chapter on hearing, he talks about how owls have such great hearing for, you know, the obvious reason. You look at an owl and they're basically like, you know, an ear, a set of ears on a face. But he talks about how not only are their ears large, but their faces and the faces on their the feathers on their face are stiff in such a way that it like directs all the sound to its ears like a giant satellite dish, so that it hears better. And then the thing that was really interesting is he talks about how most owls, their ears are not symmetrical. What, instead of being at, you know, 9 and 3 like our ears, they're like at 8 and 2. And the reason for that is because it gives them very good awareness of where a sound is in space, not just kind of horizontally. Like humans are actually pretty good at detecting where a sound is coming from on the horizontal plane. But owls, because one piece of sound is hitting the other ear sooner than the other ear, they can pinpoint like from the, you know, the y-axis where the prey is, and that's because of the asymmetry in their ears. And it's really fascinating to think about that.
Well, what about like, that makes me think of like echolocation for like dolphins and bats. I assume he talks about stuff like that.
Yeah, it's wild. I can't quite remember what he said about the bats. I'm going to get it a little bit wrong, but he basically talks about how bats have two different styles of echolocation based on the species. And oh my gosh, I wish I would have like remembered this a little bit better, but he talks a lot. There's an entire chapter about echolocation. Oh, that reminds me. Oh my gosh, what he says about dolphins. This was so cool because everyone knows that dolphins use echolocation to, to perceive the world. But he talks about how they're not just like, pinging the exterior of objects. Their sonar is so advanced that they can actually see inside of objects. And he describes a dolphin as like a living MRI machine. And so it's not it can see inside of your body, not just the exterior contours of what your shape is. It can see through you. Like that's how powerful the sonar is and the echolocation of a dolphin. Another tidbit that's a little bit related. It's not quite echolocation, but when he's in the chapter about sight, he talks about a lot of times he talks about the extremes, like the animal with the biggest eye. Do you guys know what that is?
Whale.
Blue whale.
Not quite. It's the giant squid or the colossal squid, basically tied for the biggest eye. And so, like, why does this animal have the biggest eye? They talk about a swordfish has the biggest eye of any fish, and I think he said they're like maybe baseball sized or something. They're pretty big eyes, but he said that size eye is the biggest you can get and have any meaningful returns, in your investment. Zach knows all about ROI.
ROI on my eyeballs. I've got softballs and I wasted it.
Why did I evolve these giant eyes?
A squid. Why didn't I think of that?
So anyway,
wow, they are
but he talks
big.
about how like the squids live so deep in the deep ocean that it's pointless basically for them to have this big of an eye. It's an enormous eye. Why does it have an eye that is that big when a smaller eye would it offers really no advantages over a smaller eye except for one thing. It's really good at detecting bioluminescence. It's like, well, why would a squid need to care about bioluminescence? They don't eat bioluminescent things. It's because their main predator is the sperm whale that will just come charging at them, because the sperm whale is detecting them through their echolocation.
Yeah.
And so it gives them like a slight advantage because when a sperm whale is charging at them, naturally, like bioluminescent plankton and stuff is moving out of the way. And so it might detect this tiny flash of bioluminescence. And I think it's within like 130 meters is how close it is when it can, with its gigantic eye, detect the first signs of bioluminescence. And that gives it just a tiny advantage that it has a chance of escaping the grasp of a sperm whale. And that's the one and only reason why this animal has this huge eye, is so that it can survive. It doesn't use it for feeding or anything, just to get out of the way. And that brings up an interesting concept, which he talks about how each sense not only comes with an advantage, but it comes with a cost. There's an energy cost for every single sense. And so you see that animals will offload these pointless senses once they no longer serve them over hundreds of millions of years or whatever. They just offload the sense. Like, mole rats are blind. Like, what's the point of seeing? Why use any energy to develop your sense of seeing if you've got no chance of seeing anything? Instead, the naked mole rat, he talks about them in the chapter on pain, which he calls the unwanted sense. And they basically can't sense pain because they live in such carbon dioxide rich environments, that there's no air coming through, that they would basically be in constant pain, like suffering the entire time if they could sense pain. So they basically can't sense pain. And what's really interesting about pain is there's two parts of it. There's a receptor for the pain, like I said earlier, and then there's the interpretation of pain that happens in your brain. And he calls the receptor, he calls them nociceptors, and noci means like noxious, basically, like in Latin. So it's detecting damage or injury to a body. But there are lots of animals that have nociceptors, like they know that they've been damaged, but they don't appear to experience any suffering. He says that insects basically don't have the neural capacity probably to really experience what pain or suffering is. They'll just keep walking on their crushed limb like it doesn't matter, but they can still probably they have the nociceptors to know that they're damaged, but they don't care. And so it kind of brings up an interesting philosophical question, is like, why do we have pain? Like, it must be an advantage to us. And he talks about how pain, the detection of pain tells us to get away, and the experience of feeling the pain and the suffering that comes with it tells us not to go back, and it helps you learn. And he talks about how, this is really interesting. He talks about how, eyesight really blew up and became more and more advanced once animals started crawling out of the sea, right? Because now they had something to look at, right? And so he talks about how probably the concepts of, planning and, perceiving the future, or the need to do something in the future, probably came with animals coming out of the sea and being able to see across distant horizons now that they couldn't see. And the concept of, the future now exists, and animals can plan for the future instead of just reacting to whatever is happening immediately around them. Let's see what else I could talk about. He talks about this I think it's called like a 13 striped squirrel, or a 13 banded squirrel. And these animals they basically hibernate at 39 degrees, and they can keep their entire body intact and not die by in a 39 degree environment. And their heartbeat slows from like 5 beats per second to 5 beats per minute when they're in hibernation. But what's crazy is that they have these receptors that basically they don't fire off and make it uncomfortable when it's really cold. But they're also extreme the other way. They can live in an environment up to 130 degrees. And one of the experiments they talk about with these squirrels is that they would have 2 metal pads that they would put the put the squirrel on and let it choose which one it wants to hang out on. And the squirrel doesn't care, as long as the plate is above 39 degrees, no problem. It'll just chill out forever on this cold plate. And if the plate is up to 130 degrees, it doesn't care either. It only moves to the different plate if it goes beyond those extremes. But just really interesting that there are animals out there that can withstand those degrees of extremities, right? Yeah, that's pretty much the book in a nutshell. That's the format of the book. It's very interesting, and like I said, it's well written. It's I like to think that I have some kind of eye for humor. I appreciate good humor. And this book is actually funny in parts. You know how sometimes you read a book, especially like a scientific book, and they're trying to be funny, and you're just groaning the entire time you're reading it. This guy actually has some pretty funny stuff to say that is on point. And like I said, well written, well researched. And one of the pitfalls that you can kind of have in a book like this, or I don't know, like Born to Run comes to my mind that I've read, where it just feels like an overlong magazine article, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's sometimes nonfiction books can feel like that for me, and especially when it's like a reporter that's their normal trade, and they just used to writing magazine articles, and it feels like they just make one magazine article kind of long enough to cram into, or to stretch over like 200, 300 pages. This book doesn't feel like that at all. Like it doesn't fall into that pitfall. And he's an excellent author. And I'll put a plug in for his other book that I also read, which is called I Contain Multitudes. And it's about how it's just about the microbiome of animals, and just microbes, viruses, etc. Also well written. I prefer An Immense World over the other one, but if you like Immense World, you'll probably like his other book as well.
I think this is a really cool message, especially when you're in nature. You think that animals are trying to hunt you. Like we'll go camping, and my kids will ask, are there bears there? And I'm like, well, if there are, they're most likely not interested in us unless they're really hungry and starving, Yeah. But we tend to make up these stories in our minds about what animals are thinking, to your point. How did reading this book, I guess, impact your relationship with Boomer? I want to hear kind of this side of it. Are you more compassionate towards Boomer, more treats? So conversations on your walks. What?
so basically, like, what it caused me to do with Boomer is just sit back and observe him, and be more like conscious and more deliberate in the way that I would observe him, because you basically learn from the book, if you didn't know this already, that, dogs are completely dominated by their nose and their sense of smell. That's number one. And then number two is hearing, I would say. I don't know that the book goes out and says that, but like, that's what I've, observed from my own dog is like, he's hearing stuff way before I have a chance to ever hear it. Like when someone's coming home, I swear he can like, he'll start to like, it can't be smell because, all the doors are closed, but I swear he knows the sound of like my wife's van and he can hear it as it's like crawling up before the garage door is open. He like starts, going downstairs and wants to greet, the love of his life, which is my wife. He only cares about her. But the other thing is like, the book talks about how, smell is so captivating to dogs. It's so important to them that, when we go on walks with them, all they want to do is smell stuff. They just want to smell the world and smell how it's interesting. And we're just yanking on their freaking leash and like, let's go. We're here to get exercise.
Right.
But the act of smelling is stimulating to the dog's, mind. And so one of the games we started playing with Boomer is we'd kind of like make him, sit in the kitchen while we take like a handful of treats and we make him stay. And then we go into a random room and we just hide the treats in random places. And it's like his favorite game. We go back and we tell him to release and go find it. And he knows exactly what it is. And he just loves it. And it's wild. He'll usually like follow your trail, like the order in which you put the treats in random places. He'll usually find them in that order. And he can tell when the treats are gone, when there's no more treats, even though the smell must be permeating the air. You can tell when he knows that he's found the last treat. And so it's rewarding to see that in the dog and to try to find ways to, stimulate the dog that might be more matching what he wants to do versus what you want him to do.
Yeah.
And so that's pretty interesting.
Having the food bowl in a static.
What's that?
Oh, just like having the food bowl in a static place.
Yes.
Where we eat dinner in the kitchen, their food's in the kitchen. That's a great idea.
Exactly. And another weird thing, like this just happened like 2 days ago. And I don't really know. It's obviously not scientific and I'm kind of maybe extrapolating, but Kira had made, my wife had made some chicken nuggets for the kids and there were like 5 of them left over and they were just sitting on the counter. Right. And it was hours later, they were all cold and everything. And I was putting the stuff away from dinner. So I guess it wasn't hours later. Maybe it was just minutes later. Let's say. But anyway, I was clearly just minutes later putting the food away, and I was kind of deciding what to do with these nuggets because I was like, this is enough. Maybe I could just put it in a Tupperware and throw it in the fridge, and the kids might eat it. But I'm like, I'm just going to give these to Boomer. And so he was in a totally different room. He was like locked away upstairs, like really far away. And I had I grabbed his food bowl and put it on the counter next to these nuggets that have been there for hours. And I cut them up and then I put them in his bowl. Okay. So the only thing that had changed was that the nuggets were now cut up, which probably obviously, created a bunch of smell, I'm sure, into the air. But I put it into his bowl. And then as soon as I had put it into his bowl, like I didn't make a sound because it doesn't make like a clinking sound or anything. But like a few minutes later, after I put it in his bowl, he was like running into the kitchen and he was acting like I need food. Even though he had already eaten his dinner, he theoretically wasn't hungry. He was doing all the things that he does when it is dinner time and when his food's ready. And so the only thing that I could think of that he must have been experiencing, he probably knows generally what his bowl smells like or what it used to smell like. And that he's now smelling that mix of the bowl smell or the bowl residue with this new chicken that's in there, and he's freaking out and he wants the chicken. I was planning on just like kind of saving it in the bowl and, feeding it to him the next morning, but I just gave it to him right then and there because like he's obviously wanting this. And so just fascinating things like that have kind of opened up my eyes a little bit to Boomer specifically, which is our only pet, hopefully our only pet ever.
So we have our cat must be dumb because as soon as it is dark, it thinks it's time for like the morning wet food, right? We always open a can in the morning, give the cat some wet food. But if it's dark, it's like, oh, it's running. This is the cat that never really wants to be around anybody except food time. And then when it's food time, she's up purring against your leg, like ready. And it's like, no, it's midnight. I just happen to be up getting a drink. It's not time for food yet. And she just doesn't care because it must be dark. It must be time for food. So pretty funny.
That's interesting. I didn't know you had cats. When did you get cats? Recently?
About a year and a half ago.
All right. I guess I need to visit my brother more to know these things.
Well, we have chickens, and I'll tell you, there's nothing going on in a chicken's head. Nothing. We made little boxes for each of these chickens, anthropomorphizing, right? We were
Sure.
thinking, oh, they're going to want their own little place to lay their little eggs in and raise their little chicks. No, these chickens will just dump in the same place every day. I'll go out in the coop and there's 20 eggs all in the same place. It's like
I like to imagine one of them's over there going, "All right, guys, this one's for rent here," and he's like taking over the chicken coop. He's raising rent. That's what I want. That's what I want to see at your place.
All right.
Exactly.
Hey,
Hilarious.
thanks for coming on, Brad. Hey, let's talk real quick. Move you guys' heads a little bit. Let's see the state of Oregon right behind you there, Brad.
Yeah.
Very, very cool. And then we got the famous arch from Utah behind Zach. Zach, tell us about these things.
Well, we have this company. We design steel plates, and so we can make any design. We recently just released Abraham Lincoln's image, his face in steel, and you think that'd be kind of hard to like capture someone's face in a two-dimensional medium in steel, where you've got a positive piece and a negative piece. But we're learning to design different things, and it's just so much fun. And everyone loves the state that they were born or where they're from. And we've done a number of states like Alaska, which was a really cool one, California, Brad, by the way, if you're getting a collection going. But we made that one for Brad. He was kind enough to order Oregon, and we're trying to do every state in the U.S. We've, I think, done about 10 or so. So we've got about another 40 states to go. But we're having fun doing it. The website is, you can just go to the Etsy shop. It's stillpeakstudio.etsy.com if you want to look at some of the images.
Awesome.
Dude, I can't wait to see the Wyoming and Colorado ones you do, dude.
Those are going to be
legit.
Those are going to be amazing. How do you even cut those? I mean, that must be off the charts.
It's just a metal sheet,
difficult.
Bro.
It's a rectangle.
It's got to be the correct ratio, though. Exactly. You know.
Yeah, but steel's a cool medium. I mean, you can heat it up and turn it different colors. You can make it blue or brown, and you can sand it and make it really shiny. So it's kind of fun. We're at the front end of this company, so we're
all
learning.
Right, tell us the website one more time.
All right, it's Still Peak Studio.
Still Peak with no S. So Still Peak.
Yep, Still Peak Studio.etsy.com.
Awesome.
That's to go to our shop, or just stillpeakstudio.com.
Awesome. All right. Hey, thanks again, Brad. Really appreciate you having it. Well, wait. We got to get a rating. What do you, is this a triple, double, home run?
Yeah, we need a rating.
Yeah. Again, like I said last time, you don't go on a podcast to pitch a book that sucks, hopefully. And so, could you imagine, like, next time
we've thought about that. We're trying to find one that we didn't like.
Yeah. No, I mean, anyway. But I think it's a solid home run, super interesting, super eye-opening. Just one more take home that I'll kind of close with is what's interesting to me about the book is just the concept of perspective. And that concept is really important to me just as a person. I'm always trying to like get my kids to get out of their own brains and try to think about how, other people or other things perceive the world, and how that might enrich your own understanding of other people and the world in and of itself. And so it was really satisfying to, think outside not only of my own brain and other people, but just completely other organisms and, what they're thinking and what they're feeling. And it gets kind of, I got a little existential too, because you kind of think about these, he describes insects almost as like drones, because they're not really thinking about what they're doing. They're just, just kind of just doing their thing, what they're programmed to do. And so that got me thinking, like, am I doing that? Am I just a mindless drone that's,
Yes,
drifting from
definitely.
thing to thing and from urge to urge? And it kind of makes you think about the amazingness that is humanity and the human experience, and how, we are alike when it comes to animals, but we're one of the few animals that has, really advanced perception that goes beyond, perceiving the world. We can now perceive abstract concepts.
Yes.
And that's something that makes us so unique and so different. So that it's always a good opportunity to think outside of yourself and see something else from from someone else's perspective.
So
Awesome.
does Boomer experience joy?
When
Oh,
Kira's
yeah.
around.
Yeah, whenever she sees Kira, like it came over. Like it's so funny because when I'm home, you know, he just kind of perches up on his little dog bed and hangs out, and sometimes when he thinks I'm not home, like he doesn't realize that I'm home. He'll just kind of perch out and just look out the window, just waiting for the love of his life to come back. So anyway, Boomer's classic.
Awesome.
Awesome. Well, hey, thanks for being the first 2-time relief pitcher, second time to the mound. Bravo. Really appreciate having you on, Brad, as always, and look forward to the next time you're on. Thanks everybody for listening. Please like, subscribe, all that fun stuff. 5 stars, whatever, 2 stars, I don't care. Just rate it. And then thanks again to Deja Vega for the music. Looking forward to Liggett Fest 4 coming up in June in Manchester, or in Northwich, UK. If you're in the area, come and see at the Salty Dog. All right, guys, we'll talk to you soon. Thanks for listening to the Pitchbook Podcast.